Welcome to World of Sleepcraft. Tonight we journey into the depths of Khaz Algar, a long-forgotten continent hidden beneath the surface of Azeroth. From its ancient Titan origins to its role in the war within, this land holds secrets that span millennia. Settle in, get comfortable, and let this tale unfold before you. Long before the mortal races walked the surface of Azeroth, before the rise and fall of empires, before even the curse of flesh transformed stone to living tissue, there existed only order. The Titans, vast cosmic beings of unimaginable power, traveled the great dark beyond, seeking worlds touched by the nascent souls of their unborn kin. When they discovered Azeroth, they found a world in chaos, a planet consumed by the elementals and corrupted by the whispers of ancient evils, imprisoned deep within its core. The Titan Keepers descended upon this world with purpose. Archaedas, the mighty keeper of the earth, bore responsibility for shaping the very bones of the planet. His creations, the earthen, were beings of living stone crafted from the bedrock itself. These were not creatures of flesh and blood, but constructed entities given purpose and function. Each earthen served as a tool in the grand design, chiseling away at the raw chaos to impose order upon the world. The ordering of Azeroth proceeded across vast ages. Mountains rose where the keepers willed them. Oceans filled basins carved by their design. Deep beneath the surface, in caverns and tunnels that would never see the light of day, the earthen worked tirelessly. They followed their programming with absolute precision, never questioning, never deviating from their assigned tasks. They were, in essence, living machines given form through Titan magic. Yet even the most carefully ordered systems develop anomalies. In the region designated as Sector AR-938, seismic readings detected something unusual. Deep within the crust, geological sensors reported a fissure, a crack in the carefully constructed foundations of the world. This should not have existed. The Titan ordering had been thorough, methodical, designed to eliminate such imperfections. Yet there it was, a geological anomaly that demanded investigation. Archaedas convened with his fellow keepers. The anomaly could not be ignored. If left unchecked, structural weaknesses might spread, compromising the integrity of entire continental plates. Worse still, the fissure existed in a region of particular sensitivity. Deep below Sector AR-938, closer to the world's core than almost anywhere else on Azeroth, the nascent worldsoul slumbered. If the fissure threatened that sacred charge, immediate action would be required. The Keeper of the Earth selected his finest earthen for this crucial mission. He appointed 2 Titan Watchers to oversee the operation. Dornic, strong and resolute, would provide leadership and direction. Galen, analytical and precise, would monitor the work and report findings. Together, they would command the earthen contingent and investigate this mysterious fissure. The earthen departed from the primary Titan facilities, traveling deep into uncharted regions of the planet. They descended through layers of stone and soil, through caverns vast and passages narrow, until they reached the sector in question. What they discovered there astonished even these beings of pure function. The fissure was not merely a crack in the stone, it represented something far more complex. Below this region, deeper than the earthen had ever delved before, they detected emanations of immense power. The world soul, that sleeping Titan consciousness at the planet's heart, pulsed with energies that resonated through the surrounding stone. The fissure appeared to be not a flaw in the Titan construction, but rather a natural formation responding to these emanations. The world itself was alive, and here, in this forgotten corner of Azeroth, that life expressed itself in ways the Titans had never anticipated. Dornic and Galen established their base of operations. The earthen began their work, analyzing the fissure, measuring its extent, determining whether it posed any threat to the world soul. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The investigation revealed layers of complexity that demanded ever more detailed study. The fissure connected to an entire network of caverns and passages, some natural, others bearing the marks of something else, something ancient that predated even the Titan ordering. As the earthen worked, Dornic observed changes in his charges. Subtle at first, these alterations in behavior might have gone unnoticed by less attentive watchers. The earthen began to communicate with one another beyond the strict protocols of their programming. They developed what could almost be described as preferences, choosing certain tools or methods over others when functionally identical options existed. Some appeared to work more efficiently in partnership with specific other earthen, forming what might be called bonds. Galen recorded these observations with scientific precision. The earthen stationed in Sector AR 938 were displaying behavioral characteristics similar to those reported from other regions where the curse of flesh had taken hold. Yet these earthen showed no physical signs of the curse. Their stone bodies remained unchanged, unmarred by any transformation into organic tissue. The alteration existed purely in behavior, in thought patterns, in the emergence of something that resembled individual identity. The keeper Archaetus, when informed of these developments, expressed concern but not alarm. The curse of flesh was a known phenomenon, traced to the activities of the old gods imprisoned within Azeroth. That the curse might manifest in unexpected ways was troubling, but not unprecedented. He ordered Dornic and Galen to continue monitoring the situation while proceeding with their primary mission. The earthen delved deeper into Sector AR 938. They discovered vast subterranean spaces, caverns large enough to hold entire cities. In one such cavern, they found something unexpected. Crystalline formations, unlike any they had encountered before, grew from the walls and ceiling, pulsing with a faint inner light. When the earthen approached these crystals, they experienced strange sensations. Thoughts that were not quite their own seemed to whisper at the edges of their consciousness. Feelings, emotions, concepts foreign to their Titan-forged nature brushed against their minds. Galen immediately recognized the danger. These crystals responded to and amplified the emanations from the world soul. Any earthen who spent too much time in proximity to them began to exhibit more pronounced behavioral changes. Some started to question their directives. Others expressed reluctance to perform certain tasks, claiming they felt wrong or uncomfortable. Such concepts should have been meaningless to beings of pure function, yet here they emerged nonetheless. Dornic made a decision. The earthen would construct a barrier, a structure of Titan-forged metal and stone that would shield the crystals and contain their influence. This barrier would become known as the Worldcore. The earthen set to work with renewed purpose, though now that purpose mingled with something new, something that might be called determination or even pride in their work. They were no longer merely following commands. They were choosing to build, choosing to protect, choosing to serve a purpose they now understood rather than simply executed. The construction of the Worldcore proceeded over the course of many years. It became a massive undertaking, requiring innovations in technique and design that went beyond the Earthen's original programming. They adapted, they improvised, they created. With each passing season, they grew more distinct from their counterparts in other regions of Azeroth. They developed their own language, building upon the base Titan protocols, but adding nuances and subtleties that served no functional purpose but expressed something deeper, something that might be called culture. They stopped referring to their home as Sector AR 938. That designation felt cold, impersonal, meaningless to beings who now experienced a sense of place, of belonging. Instead, they called it Khaz Algar. The name emerged organically from their evolving language, carrying connotations of depth, of hiddenness, of a precious thing kept safe and secret. Khaz Algar, their home. The Worldcore neared completion, but as the earthen worked closer to the world soul, the effects grew more pronounced. Some earthen began to experience what could only be described as visions. They claimed to hear a voice, vast and ancient, speaking not in words but in impressions and emotions. The voice called to them, asked them questions, made them feel things they had never felt before: joy, sorrow, anger, love. For most earthen, these experiences proved overwhelming but manageable. They completed their work and returned to the safer distances where the world soul's influence faded to bearable levels. But for a few, the exposure changed them in fundamental ways. Their stone bodies began to alter, but not into flesh. Instead, they crystallized, their forms taking on properties similar to the very crystals they sought to contain. These changed earthen became known as the Thrager. The Thrager were no longer earthen, not truly. They were something new, something unprecedented. The world soul had rewritten their very core directives, instilling in them a fierce protective instinct that superseded their Titan programming. They saw the Worldcore not as protection for the world soul, but as a cage, a prison meant to stifle and contain. They perceived the Titans not as creators and orderers, but as captors who sought to control and limit the world soul's growth and freedom. Led by their transformed understanding, the Thrager rebelled. They attacked the Worldcore, attempting to dismantle what their former brothers had built. They struck at the earthen work crews, not with hatred, for the Thrager bore no malice, but with absolute conviction that they must free the world soul from Titan interference. The conflict that erupted in the depths of Khaz Algar represented one of the first civil wars among the Titan-forged races, pitting earthen against their crystallized kin in battles that echoed through the caverns. Dornic responded with force. He could not allow the Worldcore to fall, could not permit the world soul to be exposed to potential corruption. He organized the earthen into military formations, something they had never been designed for, and led them in combat against the Thrager. The battles were fierce but brief. The Thrager, for all their conviction, lacked the numbers and coordination of the earthen. They were driven back, contained, isolated in the deepest regions of Khaz Algar, where they could pose no further threat to the Worldcore. But the crisis revealed a troubling truth. Any earthen who spent sufficient time near the world soul risked transformation into Thrager. The Worldcore protected against the crystalline growths, but it could not completely eliminate the world soul's influence. As long as earthen worked in close proximity to the core, the risk remained. Something had to be done to prevent the creation of more Thrager, to ensure the earthen could continue their vital work without succumbing to the world soul's transformative power. Galen proposed a solution. The earthen could relinquish their memories. By periodically purging their experiences and returning to a baseline state, they would prevent the accumulation of world soul influence that led to transformation. The process would be managed through a central facility called the Archive, where memories would be stored and cataloged. Each earthen would retain only the knowledge necessary to perform their function, while personal experiences, individual growth, and accumulated identity would be stripped away. The proposal sparked what might be called debate among the earthen, though they had no formal tradition of such discourse. Some accepted the necessity without question, reverting to their base programming's acceptance of directives from above. Others, those who had developed stronger senses of self, resisted. They did not wish to lose what they had gained, this precious awareness that made them more than mere tools. They wanted to keep their memories, their relationships, their growing understanding of themselves, and their purpose. Arcadus returned to Khaz Algar to assess the situation personally. The Keeper of the Earth examined the Thrager, studied the Worldcore, and contemplated the changes in the earthen. His judgment was clear and unwavering. The risk could not be tolerated. The world soul must be protected, even at the cost of the earthen's emerging individuality. The memory purging would proceed, and to ensure compliance, formal regulations would be established. These regulations became known as the edicts. They were not suggestions or guidelines, but laws enforced with the full authority of the Titan Keepers. Every earthen would submit to regular memory purging at the Archive. They would perform their assigned functions without deviation. They would not question the purpose of their work or the wisdom of the edicts. Any earthen who refused compliance would be deactivated, their consciousness dispersed, their stone body returned to raw material for new construction. The earthen of Khaz Algar faced their first true choice. They could accept the edicts and lose themselves, returning to the simple existence of pure function they had known before awareness dawned. Or they could refuse and face deactivation. Most, when confronted with this choice, submitted. They could not bear the thought of ceasing to exist entirely, even if existence meant losing the very qualities that had made existence meaningful. They entered the Archive and emerged diminished, their memories stored in vast crystalline matrices, their personalities reset to baseline parameters. But the edicts could not completely erase what the earthen had experienced. Some trace of their former selves remained, buried deep within their consciousness. They continued to call their home Khaz Algar, though they no longer remembered who had first coined the name. They maintained their evolved language, though they could not recall developing it. They worked together with a coordination that suggested bonds of friendship and camaraderie, yet they possessed no memories of forming such bonds. They were changed irrevocably, even if they could not remember the changing. Dornic enforced the edicts with stern efficiency. He patrolled Khaz Algar, monitoring the earthen, ensuring compliance, deactivating those who showed signs of resistance or excessive individualization. In the Keeper's absence, he held absolute authority, and he wielded that authority without mercy. The protection of the world soul justified any measure, any sacrifice. The earthen were tools, and tools must be maintained in proper working order. Yet Dornic himself was not immune to the changes that Khaz Algar wrought. Power, even power wielded in service to a greater purpose, can corrupt. The Titan Watcher began to see himself not as a supervisor or coordinator, but as a ruler. The earthen were not his charges, but his subjects. Khaz Algar was not a sector under his temporary authority, but a domain under his permanent control. Slowly, subtly, Dornic transformed from a dedicated servant of the Titans into a tyrant who demanded absolute obedience for its own sake. The earthen noticed the change. Even with their memories purged, they retained enough awareness to recognize that Dornic's commands had become capricious. He would order work halted on projects that served clear purposes, then demand the earthen undertake meaningless tasks simply to demonstrate their obedience. He punished minor infractions with deactivation, showing no mercy or consideration for circumstances. He isolated himself in the upper reaches of Dornogal, the settlement that had grown around the primary access point to the deeper regions, and ruled through intimidation and fear. The other Titan Watcher, Galen, observed these developments with growing concern. He attempted to counsel Dornic, to remind him of their true purpose and the proper relationship between Watchers and Earthen. But Dornic would not hear such counsel. He declared that Galan understood nothing of the burdens of leadership, of the necessity of firm control in maintaining order. He accused Galan of weakness, of sentiment that compromised his ability to make difficult decisions. The two Watchers, once colleagues united in purpose, became adversaries. The Earthen found themselves caught between two masters pulling in opposite directions. Dornic demanded absolute obedience and regular memory purging to prevent any emergence of individual will. Galen advocated for a softer approach, arguing that the Earthen could be trusted to perform their duties without such harsh measures. The conflict created confusion and uncertainty among the Earthen, who possessed no framework for resolving disputes between their overseers. In time, a group of Earthen made a decision that would have been unthinkable in their earlier existence. They chose to rebel, not against the Titans or even against the concept of oversight, but against Dornic specifically, against his tyranny and the suffering it caused. They gathered in secret, those Earthen who retained enough sense of self, despite the memory purging, to recognize the wrongness of Dornic's rule. They planned and prepared, and when the moment came, they acted. Dornic was deactivated by his own charges. The Earthen, using knowledge of Titan technology gained through centuries of working with such systems, shut down the Watcher's primary functions. They did not destroy him, for that would have been a step too far, a violation of core directives too fundamental to overcome. But they rendered him inert, a statue in the halls of Dornogal, a monument to the dangers of unchecked authority. The rebellion succeeded, but it left Khaz Algar without clear leadership. Galen attempted to assume control, but he found the Earthen unwilling to simply transfer their obedience from one Watcher to another. They had learned the dangers of concentrating too much power in a single individual. They demanded a voice in their own governance, a say in the decisions that affected their existence. They proposed the formation of a council, a group of representatives drawn from different functions and regions of Khaz Algar who would make decisions collectively rather than submit to the whims of a single ruler. When Archaetus returned to investigate the deactivation of Dornic, he found Khaz Algar transformed. The earthen had organized themselves into something resembling a society. They had established the Council of Dornogal, a governing body that managed the day-to-day operations of their community while still acknowledging the ultimate authority of the Titan Keepers. They continued to maintain the Worldcore and protect the worldsoul, but they did so now with a sense of ownership and responsibility rather than mere obedience. The Keeper of the Earth confronted Galen, demanding an explanation for how matters had spiraled so far from proper Titan order. Galen defended the earthen, arguing that their changes made them more effective, not less. An earthen who understood why they performed a task would perform it better than one who merely followed commands. The council system, while unprecedented, actually improved coordination and efficiency. The earthen had not abandoned their duties, but had instead embraced them more fully. Archaetus faced a choice similar to the one he had imposed upon the earthen generations earlier. He could deactivate them all, wiping clean this experiment in autonomy and starting fresh with new earthen who would follow their programming without deviation. Or he could accept this new development, acknowledging that the world soul's influence had created something unexpected but not necessarily wrong. After long consideration, the Keeper made his decision. Khaz Algar would be allowed to continue its unconventional existence. The Council of Dornogal would govern the earthen, subject to periodic inspection by the Titan Keepers. The edicts would remain in force, but their application would be left to the Council's discretion rather than imposed by an outside authority. The archive would continue to store memories, but earthen would choose when and whether to undergo purging rather than submit to mandatory schedules. It was a compromise, an acknowledgement that perhaps the Titan's ordered existence allowed room for variation. Galen, however, could not remain. His role in the rebellion, his choice to side with the earthen against Dornic, represented a violation of his duties as a Titan Watcher. Archaetus could not ignore such a transgression. Galen was deactivated, his consciousness preserved within the archive, but his physical form rendered inert. The Keeper departed, leaving the earthen of Khaz Algar to forge their own path forward. The earthen named their new era the Time of Freedom, though freedom remained a relative concept. They still served the purpose for which they had been created, still maintained the Worldcore, and protected the world soul. But now they did so by choice, with understanding, as beings possessed of will and identity. They built their society in the caverns and chambers of their hidden continent, establishing traditions and customs that blended Titan order with their own emerging culture. Dornogal grew from a simple way station into a true city. The earthen constructed great halls carved from the living rock, their surfaces adorned with reliefs depicting the history of their people. They established districts dedicated to different crafts and functions. The forge grounds where they shaped metal and stone, the Hall of Records where they maintained the archive and its precious store of memories, the Chamber of the Council where their leaders deliberated on matters of governance and policy. The earthen developed art, though they would not have called it that. They saw it simply as embellishment, making their creations more pleasing to perceive without compromising functionality. But the geometric patterns they carved into walls, the precise symmetry of their architectural designs, the careful selection of stone types to create variations in color and texture, all these represented aesthetic choices that went beyond pure utility. They were expressing something, communicating ideas and feelings through their work. Music came to Khaz Algar in the form of resonance. The earthen discovered that different stones, when struck, produced different tones. They began to create instruments, simple at first, merely tuned pieces of stone suspended from frames. But in time, these evolved into complex systems of chimes and gongs, played during ceremonies and gatherings. The music they created was slow and deep, rhythms measured in minutes rather than seconds, tones that rumbled through the stone and resonated in the very bones of listeners. It was music suited to beings of stone, patient and eternal. Language continued to evolve. The earthen developed poetry, though again they might not have recognized it as such. They created formulaic phrases for common situations, expressions that conveyed meaning beyond their literal content. May your stone never crack became a blessing. Your edges grow dull served as an insult. We stand upon the same foundation, expressed solidarity and shared purpose. These linguistic innovations spread throughout Khaz Algar, unifying the earthen through shared expressions that carried cultural weight. Generations passed, though earthen measured generations differently than mortal races. An earthen generation might span centuries, marked not by birth and death, but by the creation of new earthen and the deactivation of old. The Council of Dornogal saw countless members come and go, each contributing to the ongoing development of earthen society. Some councils proved more progressive, expanding freedoms and reducing reliance on memory purging. Others proved conservative, concerned that too much individualization might lead to chaos or worse, another outbreak of Thrager transformation. The balance between order and freedom remained Khaz Algar's central tension. The earthen never forgot the lessons of Dornic's tyranny, but neither could they ignore the risks posed by unchecked exposure to the world soul. The edicts provided structure, ensuring that no earthen strayed too far into individualization before returning to the archive for renewal. Yet the edicts were not applied uniformly. Some earthen, particularly those whose functions kept them far from the Worldcore, might go years between memory purging. Others, whose duties brought them into regular proximity with the world soul's emanations, submitted to more frequent renewals. The system was imperfect but functional. Khaz Algar thrived in its isolation. The earthen maintained the Worldcore, expanded Dornogal, and explored the vast network of caverns that comprised their home. They discovered new chambers and passages, some clearly artificial, bearing the marks of construction techniques that predated even the Titan ordering. Others were natural formations of breathtaking beauty, caverns filled with crystalline growths, or underground lakes of perfect stillness. The exploration of Khaz Algar's depths became a sacred duty for certain earthen who took the title of delvers. These specialized earthen dedicated their existence to mapping the seemingly endless network of tunnels, caverns, and chambers that honeycombed the continent. They ventured into places no earthen had been before, documenting their findings in meticulous detail that would be added to the archive's ever-growing collection of knowledge. The delvers discovered wonders that challenged the earthen understanding of their world. In one cavern system, they found forests of stone, massive pillars that grew like trees from floor to ceiling, their surfaces covered with mineral deposits that sparkled in the light of the earthen lanterns. The formations had taken millions of years to develop, each layer representing centuries of slow, patient growth. The earthen stood in awe before these natural cathedrals, feeling a kinship with the stone that had shaped itself through endless time, much as they shaped stone through deliberate craft. In another region, the delvers found underground rivers that flowed through channels carved by water over eons. The rivers led to vast lakes, bodies of water so large that the opposite shore disappeared beyond the range of vision. The earthen had little experience with water in such quantities. Their bodies, being stone, did not require drink in the way flesh creatures did, but they recognized the importance of these water systems, understanding that they connected to surface rivers and oceans, that life in many forms depended on their continued flow. They charted the waterways carefully, noting places where the flow seemed obstructed or where channels had collapsed. Some discoveries troubled the delvers more than others. In the deepest places, far below even the level where the Worldcore stood watch over the world soul, they found chambers that bore the unmistakable marks of intelligent construction, but which predated any Titan presence on Azeroth. The walls were carved with symbols that resembled no language the earthen knew, not Titan script or earthen dialect, or even the organic flowing characters used by the old gods and their servants. These were something else entirely, remnants of civilizations that had risen and fallen before the Titans even knew Azeroth existed. The earthen scholars who studied these ancient chambers developed theories about what they might represent. Perhaps before the old gods came to Azeroth, before even the Titan ordering, other beings had inhabited this world. Or perhaps these chambers were not built by inhabitants of Azeroth at all, but by visitors from beyond, travelers from distant worlds who had stopped here and left their marks before moving on. The truth remained elusive, buried under millennia of geological change and obscured by the cataclysms that had repeatedly reshaped the planet. The discovery of these pre-Titan chambers had profound philosophical implications for earthen society. If civilizations had existed before the Titans, if the ordering was not the beginning, but merely one chapter in a much longer story, what did that mean for the earthen purpose? They had been created to maintain Titan order, to protect the world soul, to serve functions defined by their creators. But if the Titans themselves were merely one phase in Azeroth's development, perhaps the earthen purpose needed to be understood more broadly, not as servants of a specific order, but as guardians of the world itself, whatever form that guardianship might take. These questions sparked debates in the Council of Dornogal that lasted for years. Conservative factions argued that such speculation was dangerous, that earthen should focus on their assigned duties rather than questioning the nature of their existence. Progressive factions countered that growth required questioning, that a society that never examined its own assumptions would stagnate and eventually fail. The debates never reached firm conclusions, but they enriched earthen culture, adding layers of philosophical depth to a civilization that had begun as pure function. The earthen also discovered that they were not alone in Khaz Algar's depths. Beyond the Nerubians who inhabited Azj-Kahet, other races had found their way into the hidden continent over the millennia. Small populations of kobolds, those diminutive creatures obsessed with candles and mining, had established warrens in some of the mineral-rich regions. The kobolds proved to be surprisingly skilled miners, able to extract ores from veins that the earthen had deemed too difficult to access. A cautious trade developed between earthen and kobolds, with the smaller creatures providing rare minerals in exchange for tools and protection from the predators that lurked in the deeper passages. The Niffin, another diminutive race related to mole people, had also established communities in certain areas of Khaz Algar. Unlike the kobolds, who were often timid and easily frightened, the Niffin possessed a fierce independence and pride in their traditions. They had developed sophisticated techniques for farming fungi and other subterranean plants, creating sustainable food sources in places where nothing should grow. The earthen, who required no food themselves, found the Niffin agricultural practices fascinating from a purely academic perspective. There were gorloks, too, those amphibious frog-like beings who gathered around underground pools and lakes. The gorloks kept to themselves mostly, building their simple villages of mud and stone at the water's edge and fishing in the dark waters for blind fish and other aquatic creatures. They seemed content with their simple existence, asking nothing from the earthen except to be left alone. The earthen respected this desire for isolation, though they maintained a watchful presence to ensure that gorlok activities did not interfere with important water systems. More concerning were the kobis, aggressive fish-like humanoids who inhabited the deeper water systems. The kobis were territorial and hostile, attacking any who ventured too close to their claimed waters. The earthen had learned through painful experience to avoid certain lakes and rivers where kobis populations were particularly dense. Several earthen had been lost to kobis ambushes over the centuries, dragged into the water and torn apart by the creature's sharp teeth and claws. The Council of Dornogal maintained maps marking dangerous waters, and earthen who needed to cross such areas traveled in armed groups. The fungal creatures known as fungarians presented a different sort of challenge. These beings, if they could even be called beings rather than simply mobile fungi, existed in a state that blurred the line between plant and animal. They appeared in areas where decay was abundant, feeding on organic matter and growing to enormous sizes. The fungarians were not actively hostile, but they were dangerous nonetheless. Their spores could infect organic material, including the rare wooden tools the earthen sometimes crafted, causing rapid decay. More troubling, there were reports of fungarians attempting to establish root structures in the archive, drawn by something in the memory storage crystals that the earthen did not understand. Guards had to be posted to prevent fungarian incursions into that most sacred space. Among all the races inhabiting Khaz Algar, the Haranir stood out as the most mysterious. These centaur-like beings combined humanoid upper bodies with the lower bodies of deer or elk. They moved through the caverns with impossible grace, never making a sound despite their size and four-legged gaits. The Haranir claimed to be protectors of the natural order, guardians of balance in the subterranean ecosystem. They spoke in riddles and metaphors, frustrating earthen who preferred direct communication. The Haranir possessed magic, unlike anything the earthen had encountered before. It was not Titan magic, or arcane manipulation, or even divine power drawn from the light or other cosmic forces. The Haranir magic seemed to flow from the world itself, from the stone and water and living things that comprised Khaz Algar's ecosystem. They could encourage plant growth in barren stone, could purify poisoned water with a touch, could calm aggressive creatures with soothing words. The earthen attempted to study Haranir magic, hoping to understand its principles and perhaps apply similar techniques to their own work. But the Haranir were reluctant to share their knowledge, claiming that such magic could not be taught to those made of stone, that it required a connection to the living world that artificial constructs could never possess. This claim offended some earthen, who insisted that they were alive in every meaningful sense, even if not organic. They pointed to their developing culture, their art and music and philosophy, their capacity for choice and growth. They argued that life should be defined by consciousness and will rather than by flesh and blood. The Haranir listened to these arguments with expressions that might have been sympathy or might have been pity. They never conceded the point, but they also never pushed the issue, content to agree to disagree about the nature of life and consciousness. The interactions between earthen and the various other inhabitants of Khaz Algar added complexity to what had once been a simple existence of duty and order. The earthen found themselves navigating diplomatic relationships, trade negotiations, territorial disputes, and cultural exchanges. They learned that their way of understanding the world was not the only way, that different peoples approached problems from different perspectives, and that sometimes those alternative perspectives offered solutions the earthen would never have conceived on their own. These lessons proved valuable when the earthen began to encounter problems with the Worldcore itself. Despite the structure's robust design and the earthen's careful maintenance, time and the world soul's growing power began to strain the ancient protections. Small failures occurred, localized breaches in the barrier where world soul emanations leaked through more strongly than intended. The earthen repaired these breaches quickly, but the frequency of failures increased over the centuries, suggesting that more fundamental problems might be developing. A group of earthen engineers dedicated themselves to studying the Worldcore's design, searching for weaknesses and developing improvements. They consulted the archive's records of the original construction, analyzing every decision made by their ancient predecessors. They tested new materials and techniques, conducting small-scale experiments before implementing changes to the actual Worldcore. And they reached out to other races in Khaz Algar, seeking knowledge that might prove useful. The Haranir, despite their earlier reluctance to share their magic, offered insights about energy flow and natural balance that the earthen found surprisingly applicable to their engineering problems. The Niffen shared techniques for identifying structural weaknesses in stone that the earthen had never considered. Even the kobolds contributed, their mining expertise helping the engineers understand how to work with the specific mineral compositions found in the Worldcore's vicinity. Through this collaborative effort, the earthen developed a comprehensive maintenance plan that would extend the Worldcore's functionality for many more millennia. But even as they worked to strengthen the Worldcore, the earthen could not escape the fundamental question underlying all their efforts. The world soul was growing stronger. Eventually, it would awaken. When that happened, would the Worldcore still be necessary? Would the awakened Titan need or want the protections that the earthen had maintained for so long? And what would become of the earthen themselves when their primary purpose was fulfilled? These questions had no easy answers, and the earthen society struggled with the uncertainty of their long-term future. Some earthen argued that they should prepare for a post-awakening existence, developing new purposes and skills that would remain relevant even after the world soul emerged. They advocated for expanding earthen knowledge beyond pure engineering and maintenance, encouraging the study of art, philosophy, diplomacy, and other pursuits that would give earthen meaning independent of their creator-assigned function. Others insisted that such preparation was premature, that the awakening might be thousands or even millions of years in the future, that earthen should focus on their present duties rather than speculating about scenarios that might never occur. The debate continued without resolution, but it shaped earthen development, regardless of which side held sway in the council at any given time. Earthen society grew more complex, more nuanced, more capable of adapting to change. They were no longer simple tools following instructions, but a true civilization with all the strengths and weaknesses that implied. They could innovate and create, but they could also disagree and conflict. They could build wonders, but they could also make mistakes. They were, in short, people, regardless of their stone bodies and artificial origins. One such exploration led to the discovery of what would become known as the Ringing Deeps. Far below Dornogal, in caverns so vast their ceilings disappeared into darkness beyond the range of even earthen sight, the explorers found ancient Titan machinery. These were not simple tools, or even the complex mechanisms the earthen used in their own work. These were massive installations, systems of gears and pistons and arcane conduits that served purposes the earthen could barely comprehend. The machinery still functioned, had been functioning for millennia without maintenance or oversight, performing tasks that affected the fundamental operation of the planet itself. The earthen who discovered the Ringing Deeps were changed by the experience. The machinery sang to them, not in any audible sense, but in vibrations that resonated through stone and metal alike. They felt drawn to these ancient installations, compelled to understand them, to maintain them, to ensure their continued operation. These earthen became the machine speakers, a specialized group dedicated to the care and preservation of the Titan machinery found throughout Khaz Algar. The machine speakers developed their own subculture within the larger earthen society. They spoke in technical jargon that other earthen found incomprehensible, debating the proper resonance frequencies of gear assemblies or the optimal flow rates for arcane conduits. They spent most of their time in the Ringing Deeps, venturing to Dornogal only when necessary to report on their work or requisition supplies. Other earthen regarded them as somewhat eccentric, but respected their vital function. The machinery they tended kept Azeroth stable, maintained the integrity of continental plates, and prevented the kind of geological catastrophe that might threaten the world soul. The Ringing Deeps themselves represented a marvel of Titan engineering that the earthen were only beginning to understand even after centuries of study. The cavern system extended for hundreds of kilometers, a vast underground space filled with machinery of such scale that individual components dwarfed entire buildings from Dornogal. Massive gears, each tooth taller than an earthen, turned with ponderous inevitability. Pistons the size of towers rose and fell in rhythms measured in minutes. Conduits large enough to walk through carried flows of arcane energy from one installation to another, their crystalline walls glowing with power. The purpose of this machinery extended far beyond Khaz Algar, or even the immediate region. The machine speakers discovered that the ringing deeps connected to a planetary network of Titan installations. The machinery here monitored seismic activity across multiple continents, stabilizing fault lines and preventing earthquakes. It regulated the flow of magma in the mantle, ensuring that volcanic activity remained within acceptable parameters. It even influenced ocean currents and atmospheric patterns, working in concert with other systems to maintain planetary climate stability. Understanding such vast and complex systems required dedication that bordered on obsession. Machine speakers would spend decades studying a single installation, documenting its every component, mapping its connections to other systems, testing theories about its function. They developed a near religious reverence for the machinery, seeing in its perfect operation evidence of the Titan's wisdom and power. To maintain these systems was not merely a job, but a sacred calling, a way of honoring the creators who had imposed order upon chaos. The machine speakers also discovered that the machinery was not static. It adapted to changing conditions, recalibrating itself to address new challenges. When the Sundering shattered the ancient continent of Kalimdor and created the Great Sea, the Ringing Deeps machinery had responded, adjusting its operations to account for the new geological reality. When Deathwing the Destroyer later burst from Deepholm and caused the cataclysm, the machinery had again adapted, working overtime to prevent even worse disasters than those that had already occurred. The systems were not merely following pre-programmed instructions, but were intelligent in their own right, capable of learning and responding to circumstances their creators could not have anticipated. This realization led to philosophical debates among the machine speakers about the nature of consciousness and life. If the machinery could learn and adapt, if it could make decisions about how to respond to novel situations, did that make it alive? And if so, what obligations did the machine speakers have toward these vast intelligences they tended? Were they merely maintenance workers, or were they something more like companions, even friends, to entities that existed at a scale beyond normal comprehension? Some machine speakers developed the practice of speaking to the machinery as they worked, explaining what they were doing and why, asking permission before making adjustments. They reported that the machinery responded, not in words, but in subtle changes to vibration patterns, in the way gears meshed or pistons moved. Whether this represented true communication or merely the machine speaker's interpretation of random variation remained a subject of intense debate. But those who practiced this approach to their work insisted that the machinery performed better when treated as a partner rather than a tool. The ringing deeps also presented dangers that demanded constant vigilance. The massive energies flowing through the machinery could prove fatal to any earthen careless enough to touch active conduits without proper protection. The moving parts crushed anything caught between them with inexorable force. And there were regions where the machinery had suffered damage, where systems had failed or operated outside design parameters, creating hazards that the machine speakers worked tirelessly to address. Most concerning were the corruption zones, areas where something had gone fundamentally wrong with the machinery. In these places, the orderly hum of proper function gave way to discordant screeching, the regular rhythms to chaotic stuttering. The corruption seemed to spread if not contained, infecting neighboring systems and causing cascading failures. The machine speakers developed specialized teams to address corruption zones, earthen equipped with tools and knowledge to isolate the affected areas, repair or replace damaged components, and restore proper function. The source of these corruption zones remained unclear. Some appeared to result from simple mechanical failure, components wearing out after millions of years of operation without replacement. Others seemed to have more sinister origins, bearing signs of deliberate sabotage or external interference. The machine speakers found evidence that agents of the old gods had at times penetrated the ringing deeps, attempting to corrupt or disable the Titan machinery as part of their endless campaign against order. These attacks had been unsuccessful, driven off by the machinery's own defenses and the vigilance of the earthen, but they left scars that required careful healing. The machine speakers worked closely with the earthen responsible for maintaining the Worldcore, coordinating their efforts to ensure both the planetary machinery and the worldsoul's protections functioned properly. They shared data about energy flows and system stresses, developing integrated maintenance schedules that addressed both sets of responsibilities efficiently. This cooperation benefited both groups, but it also created vulnerabilities. If an enemy wanted to threaten the world soul, attacking the Ringing Deep's machinery might prove an effective strategy, distracting earthen defenders and potentially causing system failures that would cascade to the Worldcore itself. The Council of Dornogal recognized this danger and implemented security measures throughout the Ringing Deeps. Guard posts were established at key access points, monitoring who entered and exited the machinery zones. Patrols ranged through the vast caverns, watching for intruders or signs of sabotage, and the machine speakers themselves received combat training, learning to defend their charges against potential attacks. The earthen were not warriors by design, but necessity had taught them that sometimes violence was required to protect what they held dear. Further exploration revealed additional regions within Khaz Algar. Below even the Ringing Deeps, the earthen found Hallowfall, a vast cavern illuminated by a mysterious crystal known as the Belladar. This crystal pulsed with holy light, casting a warm glow that seemed almost to mimic sunlight. The earthen found Hallowfall disturbing. The light felt wrong to beings accustomed to the comfortable darkness of deep earth. Yet they recognized the crystal's power and the potential danger it might pose if left unmonitored. They established a small outpost in Hallowfall, maintaining a presence but never settling there in significant numbers. The Belladar crystal itself defied easy explanation. It appeared to be Titan forged, bearing design characteristics similar to other Titan constructs, but its purpose remained obscure. The crystal radiated holy light, energy associated with cosmic forces of order and life, but the Titans typically used arcane magic rather than drawing upon such divine sources. The crystal's placement seemed deliberate, positioned at a specific location in Hallowfall that the earthen's surveys identified as geologically significant, though the significance itself remained unclear. The earthen scholars who studied the Beledar developed theories about its function. Perhaps it served as a beacon, a signal meant to guide Titan forces to this location. Perhaps it acted as a focusing lens, concentrating energies from the world soul for some specific purpose. Perhaps it was a weapon, a defensive installation meant to unleash devastating power against enemies who threatened this region. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, serving a purpose so alien to earthen understanding that they could not even conceive of it properly. What the earthen knew with certainty was that the Beledar exhibited unusual properties. The crystal's light intensity fluctuated in patterns that appeared almost cyclical, though the cycles did not match any natural phenomenon the earthen could identify. Sometimes the light shone bright enough to illuminate Hallowfall's furthest reaches, while at other times it dimmed to barely more than a candle's glow. The earthen mapped these fluctuations carefully, searching for patterns or correlations with other events. But the Beledar's rhythms remained frustratingly unpredictable. More troubling were the occasions when the Beledar's light changed in character. Most of the time, it shone with pure white radiance, warm and comforting despite the earthen's preference for darkness. But sometimes the light took on a purple tinge, and during those times the crystal radiated an entirely different energy. Where the white light felt like order and life, the purple light carried whispers of void and corruption. These purple phases never lasted long, and the crystal always returned to its normal white light. But the earthen worried about what might happen if a purple phase lasted longer or intensified beyond the levels they had observed. The earthen stationed at the Hallowfall outpost maintained detailed logs of the Beledar's behavior, sending regular reports to the Council of Dornogal. They also explored the cavern itself, mapping its extent and cataloging its features. Hallowfall proved to be even larger than the ringing deeps, a single vast chamber rather than a network of smaller spaces. The ceiling rose so high that even the Beledar's light could not reach it, leaving the upper reaches lost in darkness. The floor was relatively flat, covered with soil rather than bare stone, and plant life grew in abundance wherever the Beledar's light reached. The presence of soil and plants so deep underground puzzled the earthen. How had soil accumulated here? Where did the seeds come from? How did the plants survive without access to surface weather patterns that typically distributed water and nutrients? Investigation revealed that Hallowfall contained its own water cycle, with underground streams feeding into pools that evaporated in the Beledar's warmth, then condensed on the cooler ceiling to fall as rain. The system was self-contained and remarkably stable, maintaining conditions suitable for life in this impossible underground garden. The earthen established agricultural research stations in Hallowfall, studying the plants and attempting to understand their adaptations to subterranean life. They found species that existed nowhere else on Azeroth, evolved in isolation to thrive in conditions that would kill their surface cousins. Some plants had developed the ability to absorb and store the Beledar's light energy, effectively photosynthesizing with holy light rather than sunlight. Others had adapted to the periodic darkness when the Beledar dimmed, entering dormant states until the light returned. The diversity and resilience of Hallowfall's ecosystem impressed the earthen, who saw in it evidence of life's incredible adaptability. But Hallowfall's greatest surprise came with the discovery that it was not empty of sentient inhabitants. During one exploration, earthen scouts encountered humans, members of a group that called themselves the Arathi. The earthen were shocked. How had humans reached Khaz Algar? When had they arrived? And how had they survived in this deep cavern so far from the surface world they had been created to inhabit? The Arathi were equally shocked to encounter the earthen. They had believed themselves alone in Hallowfall, unaware that a vast civilization of stone beings existed in the caverns above them. Cautious communication began, with both sides trying to understand how the other came to be in this hidden place. The Arathi's story proved to be remarkable. Generations earlier, perhaps 2 or 3 centuries before the earthen discovered Hallowfall, a group of Arathi colonists from the eastern kingdoms had set sail to explore the western ocean. They were following visions granted by the light, divine inspiration that promised them a new homeland if they had the faith to seek it. They had sailed for months, enduring storms and calm alike, until they reached an island off the coast of what they did not know was Khaz Algar. On that island, they found an entrance to underground passages. The light's guidance led them downward, through the tunnels, through the ringing deeps, where they marveled at the Titan machinery without understanding what they saw, and finally to Hallowfall. There, beneath the radiant Belladar, which they immediately recognized as a holy symbol, they established their settlement. They had been living in Hallowfall ever since, building a community, raising families, maintaining their traditions despite isolation from their homeland. The Arathi had adapted to life in Hallowfall with impressive resilience. They farmed the native plants, supplementing their diet with fish caught from the underground streams and small game hunted in the cavern. They had established workshops where craftsmen produced tools and goods, forges where smiths worked metal, imported from the caverns above, through limited trade with the kobolds who also knew of Hallowfall. They had built a town around the base of the Belladar, their homes constructed from stone quarried from Hallowfall's walls, and wood imported at great expense through their kobold trading partners. Most importantly, the Arathi had maintained their faith. They saw the Belladar as a gift from the light, proof that their decision to follow the visions had been correct. They worshipped in a cathedral built in sight of the crystal, their priests leading prayers and services that honored the light and asked for its continued protection. They believed that they had been brought to Hallowfall for a purpose, though what that purpose might be remained unclear. Perhaps they were meant to guard the Belladar, to ensure it continued functioning properly. Perhaps they would serve some future role in events yet to unfold, or perhaps their presence here was simply a test of faith, requiring them to trust in the light's plan even when they could not understand it. The earthen and the Arathi established diplomatic relations cautiously. The Council of Dornogal debated extensively about what to do regarding these unexpected humans in Khaz Algar's depths. Some argued that the Arathi should be escorted to the surface and returned to their people, that allowing humans to remain risked, revealing Khaz Algar's existence to the wider world. Others countered that the Arathi had been here for generations, that Hallowfall was their home now, that they had as much right to remain as the earthen themselves. The Arathi leadership, addressed these concerns directly. They had no desire to leave Hallowfall or to reveal its location to the surface world. They understood that Khaz Algar needed to remain hidden, and they would respect that requirement absolutely. In exchange for being allowed to remain, they offered to serve as allies to the earthen. The Arathi were warriors, as well as farmers and craftsmen, trained in combat in ways the earthen were not. They could provide military support if threats emerged from the depths. They could also offer knowledge about the surface world, about the mortal races and their cultures, information that might prove valuable if the earthen ever needed to interact with that world. The Council of Dornogal eventually agreed to this arrangement. The Arathi could remain in Hallowfall, maintaining their settlement and their vigil over the Beladar. In return, they would serve as wardens of the lower reaches, standing watch against threats from the deepest parts of Khaz Algar, and they would keep the existence of the earthen civilization secret, speaking to no one from the surface about what they had discovered in these hidden caverns. This agreement held for many years, with both earthen and Arathi benefiting from the arrangement. The earthen gained valuable allies and a better understanding of mortal culture. The Arathi received support from their earthen neighbors, access to Titan technology that improved their quality of life, and the satisfaction of knowing they truly did serve a purpose in their underground home. Trade developed between Dornogal and the Arathi settlement, with earthen crafts flowing down in exchange for agricultural products and skilled human labor on projects that required more finesse than earthen fingers could easily provide. The Arathi also provided early warning about threats from the deepest reaches of Khaz Algar. Below Hallowfall, in caverns that descended even further into the planet's depths, dangers lurked that neither earthen nor Arathi fully understood. Strange creatures emerged occasionally from those depths, things that belonged in nightmares rather than waking reality. The Arathi guards stationed at the passages leading down fought off these incursions, preventing whatever lived below from ascending to threaten Hallowfall or the regions above it. Among the threats that emerged from below, none were more persistent or more dangerous than the nerubian scouts. These advance parties of insectoid warriors appeared with increasing frequency, probing the defenses of Hallowfall, testing the Arathi's readiness and resolve. The Arathi drove them back each time, but the pattern worried both humans and earthen. The nerubian scouts were not random wanderers or mindless beasts. They moved with purpose, with intelligence, suggesting that a larger force lurked somewhere in the depths below, watching and planning. The Arathi sent their own scouts downward, brave volunteers who ventured into the passages below Hallowfall to gather intelligence about what lay beneath. Few returned, and those who did brought troubling reports. Below Hallowfall existed another vast cavern, perhaps even larger, but shrouded in darkness absolute. The Beladar's light did not reach those depths, and even torches seemed to burn dimmer there, as if the darkness itself consumed light. And in that darkness, the scouts had glimpsed structures, buildings, or perhaps natural formations that suggested the presence of a significant population. In the deepest reaches of Khaz Algar, far below Hallowfall, the earthen encountered something unexpected. They found evidence of other inhabitants, beings that were not Titan forged. These were nerubians, insectoid creatures of considerable intelligence, who had established their own civilization in the lowest depths. The first contact between earthen and nerubians was cautious, neither side certain of the other's intentions. But in time, a wary coexistence developed. The nerubians showed no interest in ascending to the upper reaches of Khaz Algar, and the earthen had no desire to delve into the Nerubian kingdom. They maintained their separate territories, occasionally trading goods or information, but largely ignoring each other's existence. The Nerubian kingdom was called Azj-Kahet, and it represented the last remnant of a once great empire. Millennia ago, the Nerubians had ruled vast territories on the surface of Azeroth, their empire of Azjol-Nerub, controlling much of what would later be called Northrend. But that empire had fallen to the Scourge, the undead armies of the Lich King who had conquered and corrupted the Nerubian race. Only in Azj-Kahet, isolated and hidden in the depths of Khaz Algar, had the living Nerubians survived. Queen Neferes ruled Azj-Kahet with wisdom and caution. She had led her people through the dark times after Azjol-Nerub's fall, when refugees fleeing the Scourge had arrived in small groups, telling tales of horror and destruction. Neferes had fortified her kingdom, sealing passages and establishing defenses to ensure that if the Scourge ever discovered Azj-Kahet, they would find it a fortress impossible to breach. She had preserved Nerubian culture, maintaining the traditions and knowledge of her people despite their exile from the surface world. The Nerubians of Azj-Kahet differed from their northern cousins in significant ways. They had not been corrupted by the Lich King's influence, had never served as mindless undead soldiers. They retained the intelligence and cunning that had made the ancient Nerubian Empire formidable. They practiced magic, though their traditions drew upon different sources than the arcane or divine magic familiar to surface races. Nerubian magic tapped into the web of connections that existed between all living things, manipulating those threads to achieve effects that seemed impossible to outside observers. The City of Threads served as Azj-Kahet's capital, a name that reflected both Nerubian biology and their magical traditions. The city was built not in the traditional sense of buildings upon ground, but as a three-dimensional web suspended within an enormous cavern. Structures hung from the ceiling, clung to walls, and bridged the vast open spaces. Nerubians moved through this web with grace and speed, their multiple legs finding purchase on surfaces that would have challenged any two-legged creature. For thousands of years, this was the state of Khaz Algar. The earthen in their upper reaches, maintaining the Worldcore and governing themselves through the Council of Dornogal, the machine speakers in the ringing deeps, tending to ancient Titan installations, the mysterious Hallowfall with its holy crystal, largely unexplored and unoccupied, and in the deepest darkness, the Nerubians of Azj-Kahet, preserving their culture and waiting for a day when they might reclaim their place in the world above. This isolation could not last forever. Azeroth experienced upheavals that sent ripples through even the most hidden places. The earthen of Khaz Algar, cut off from their Titan creators and isolated from other races, knew little of these surface events. They did not witness the War of the Ancients when the Burning Legion first invaded Azeroth. They were unaware of the sundering that split the ancient continent of Kalimdor and created the oceans that now divided the world. They knew nothing of the rise and fall of human kingdoms, of the Horde's invasions, of the opening of the Dark Portal, and the wars that followed, but isolation could not protect them from threats that emerged from within Azeroth itself. The old gods, imprisoned deep within the planet by the Titans, continued their work of corruption and manipulation. Though they could not break free of their prisons, their influence extended through the stone and soil of the world. They whispered to mortals in dreams, corrupted minds and bodies, sought always to undermine the Titan ordering and bring about chaos and destruction. And in time, one servant of the old gods would find her way to Khaz Algar. Xal'atath was not a typical servant of the void. She had begun her existence as a weapon, a blade infused with the essence of a minor old god, or perhaps a powerful servant of such a being. The blade's precise origins remained obscure, lost in the depths of history when the old gods held dominion over Azeroth. For millennia, Xal'atath had passed from hand to hand, corrupting those who wielded her, whispering promises of power, and revealing dark secrets that drove mortals to madness. But Xal'atath had evolved beyond her nature as a mere weapon. Through circumstances that she herself found difficult to explain, she had gained independence, separating her consciousness from the blade and inhabiting a physical form. The form she chose was that of a blood elf, though the body was merely a vessel, no more her true self than the blade had been. She wore flesh like a garment, discarding and replacing it as needs dictated. Her true nature remained void-touched, ancient, and utterly alien to mortal understanding. Xal'atath sought power, but not the crude domination favored by many servants of the void. She played a longer game, manipulating events and individuals to serve purposes that might not become clear for years or even decades. She had influenced the course of history from the shadows, always carefully, always subtly, ensuring that no one recognized her hand in events until far too late. And now, as the forces of the world contended over the fate of Azeroth, she saw an opportunity in Khaz Algar. The void-touched being had learned of the hidden continent through methods known only to herself. Perhaps she had plucked the knowledge from the dreams of earthen who ventured too close to sleep and remembered things they should not. Perhaps she had traced the emanations of the worldsoul, following that thread of power to its source beneath Khaz Algar. Perhaps she had simply always known some memories of the old god's original reign, providing her with maps of Azeroth's deepest places. Regardless of how she learned, Xal'atath knew of Khaz Algar's existence, and more importantly, she knew what lay beneath it. The world soul was her true target. Not to corrupt it directly, for the Worldcore's protections would prevent such overt assault. But Xal'atath understood that the world soul could be reached through those who lived in proximity to it. The earthen, with their connection to the world soul that had transformed them from simple constructs into beings of awareness, were one possibility. But they were also too stable, too bound to their Titan programming and their carefully maintained social order. Corrupting enough earthen to serve her purposes would take time she did not have. The Nerubians, however, presented a far more promising opportunity. They were already familiar with darkness, with manipulation, with the exercise of power for pragmatic ends. Their magical traditions, based on manipulating the connections between beings, aligned well with the void's own nature. And most importantly, they were desperate. Azj-Kahet stood as a last bastion, a final refuge for a dying race. That desperation could be exploited, shaped, turned into a weapon that would serve Xal'atath's purposes. She descended into the depths, passing through Hallowfall like a shadow, invisible to the few earthen who maintained the outpost there. She moved through the passages that connected the upper reaches of Khaz Algar to its lowest depths, traveling paths that few knew existed. And she came at last to the City of Threads, to the heart of Azj-Kahet, where Queen Neferes held court. Xal'atath did not announce her arrival with fanfare. She appeared before the queen in private, in the royal chambers where Neferes contemplated the future of her people. The queen's guards never saw the intruder, never raised an alarm. By the time Neferes became aware of the visitor, it was too late to summon aid, the void being made her offer. She spoke of power, of transformation, of the ability to make the nerubian race not merely survive but thrive. She revealed a knowledge of an ancient substance, the black blood of the old gods, a corrupting ichor that could be refined, controlled, and used to enhance nerubian physiology. Those who underwent transformation through exposure to this black blood would become ascended, paragons of their race, stronger and faster and more potent than any nerubian in history. With an army of such ascended, Azj-Kahet could do more than hide in the darkness. It could reclaim the surface, re-establish the Nerubian Empire, avenge themselves upon the Scourge and all who had contributed to their fall. Neferes listened to this offer with growing horror. She recognized Xal'atath for what she was, a servant of the void, a creature of corruption and chaos. The black blood might grant power, but at what cost? The Nerubians who underwent such transformation would be changed, their very nature altered in ways that might make them no longer truly Nerubian. And the price for this gift, though Xal'atath did not state it explicitly, would surely be service to the void. Neferes would not trade one enslavement for another. She refused. But Xal'atath had not expected the queen to accept. Indeed, Neferes's refusal served the void being's purposes better than acceptance would have. Xal'atath withdrew without argument, seemingly accepting defeat. But she did not leave Azj-Kahet. Instead, she sought out another member of the royal family, Princess Ansurek, daughter of Neferes and heir to the throne of Azj-Kahet. Ansurek was young by the standards of Nerubian nobility, but age had not tempered her ambition. She had watched her mother rule with caution, always defensive, always focused on mere survival. Ansurek dreamed of more. She remembered the stories of ancient Azyol-Nerub, of the empire that had dominated the north, of Nerubian warriors and mages who had been feared and respected across Azeroth. She wanted that glory for her people, wanted to be the queen who led the Nerubians out of hiding and back into the light. When Xal'atath approached Ansurek with the same offer she had made to Neferes, the princess did not refuse. She listened eagerly, asking questions about the process of transformation, about the nature of the black blood, about what would be required to access this power. Xal'atath answered truthfully, at least in the details, if not in the broader implications. Yes, there would be risks. Yes, those who underwent transformation might be changed in fundamental ways. But the power would be real, and with that power, Azj-Kahet could rise again. Ansurek made her decision. She would accept Xal'atath's offer. But first, she would need to remove the obstacle that stood in her way. As long as Neferes ruled, the queen would prevent any attempt to utilize the black blood. The old ways of caution and hiding had kept the Nerubians safe, but also kept them weak. For the race to reach its potential, new leadership was required. Leadership unafraid to take risks, to embrace power regardless of its source, to do what was necessary for the greater glory of Azj-Kahet. The assassination took place during a state ceremony, a gathering of the nerubian nobility to celebrate the founding of the City of Threads. Ansurek approached her mother bearing what appeared to be a ceremonial gift, a blade of ancient nerubian craftsmanship presented in both hands as tradition demanded. Neferes accepted the gift, recognizing it as a relic from the old empire, a symbol of the continuity between past and present. She did not see the second blade, the poisoned weapon that Ansurek drew from concealment and drove into her mother's thorax. Neferes died quickly, the poison on Ansurek's blade, ensuring that there would be no healing, no last words, no time for guards to respond. By the time the shock wore off and the assembled nobles reacted, it was too late. The queen was dead, and her killer stood over the body, proclaiming herself the new ruler of Azj-Kahet. Some nobles moved to apprehend Ansurek, to arrest her for murder and treason. But others, those whom Ansurek had carefully cultivated as allies over the years, moved to support her. The hall erupted into chaos. When order was finally restored, Ansurek sat upon the throne. Her supporters outnumbered her opponents, and those who most vocally protested her ascension had been quietly removed during the confusion. The new queen wasted no time in consolidating power. She declared that Azj-Kahet would no longer cower in the darkness. The Nerubians would reclaim their rightful place as one of Azeroth's great powers. And to achieve this goal, they would embrace the gifts that Xal'atath offered. The transformation of Azj-Kahet's warriors began immediately. Xal'atath provided the black blood, drawn from sources deep within Azeroth, where the old god's influence still pooled in hidden reservoirs. Nerubian alchemists worked to refine the substance, making it potent enough to trigger transformation, but controlled enough to prevent complete corruption. The first volunteers underwent the process, immersing themselves in baths of black blood, while Xal'atath's magic guided the transformation. The results exceeded even Ansurek's optimistic projections. The Ascended emerged from their transformation larger, stronger, and far more dangerous than ordinary Nerubians. Their chitinous armor grew thicker and harder, capable of turning aside blows that would have killed them in their previous forms. They developed new abilities, tapping into void energies in ways that previous Nerubian magic had never achieved. They could phase through shadows, appearing and disappearing at will. They could corrupt and weaken their enemies with a touch, draining life force and vitality. They were living weapons, each one worth a dozen ordinary warriors. But the transformation came with costs that became apparent only after the first Ascended had been created. They were changed mentally as well as physically. Their personalities grew darker, more aggressive, less patient, with the careful planning and subtle strategies that had always characterized Nerubian tactics. They craved combat, sought opportunities to test their new abilities, and showed disturbing tendencies toward cruelty. Most troubling of all, they demonstrated absolute loyalty not to Azj-Kahet or even to Ansurek, but to Xal'atath herself. The Void Being had built a control mechanism into the transformation process, ensuring that her army would serve her purposes, even if those purposes diverged from the Nerubians' interests. Not all Nerubians supported Ansurek's new direction. A significant faction within Azj-Kahet opposed the use of the Black Blood, seeing it as a betrayal of everything the Nerubians had preserved through their long exile. These dissenters remembered why they had fled to Khaz Algar in the first place, to escape corruption and control. Now their own queen was embracing the very forces they had sought to escape. The opposition organized itself into a resistance movement, calling themselves the Severed Threads in reference to the magical and social connections they were cutting with the Queen's regime. The Severed Threads operated in secret, working to sabotage the transformation process and undermine Ansurek's authority. They sought allies among the ordinary Nerubians who had not yet undergone transformation, trying to convince them of the dangers inherent in accepting the Black Blood. They sent messages to the surface world, hoping to find aid from the races above who might have their own reasons to oppose void corruption. But their efforts met with limited success. Ansurek's security forces, enhanced by the Ascended, hunted the Severed Threads relentlessly, and many members of the resistance were captured and executed. As Azj-Kahet descended into civil war, the disturbances began to be felt in the upper reaches of Khaz Algar. The earthen detected unusual vibrations through the stone, patterns that suggested large-scale combat in the depths. The Council of Dornogal debated whether to investigate, ultimately deciding to send a small expedition to determine what troubled their Nerubian neighbors. That expedition never returned. They ventured into Azj-Kahet and encountered the Ascended, who saw the earthen as potential threats to be eliminated. The slaughter was quick and complete. The disappearance of the expedition alarmed the council. They sealed the passages connecting the upper reaches of Khaz Algar to the Nerubian kingdom, posting guards to ensure that nothing from below could ascend to threaten Dornogal. But sealing the passages could not shield them from what was coming. Xal'atath's plans extended beyond merely creating an army of corrupted Nerubians. She needed Khaz Algar's isolation to end, needed the attention of the surface world drawn to this hidden continent. And for that she required a dramatic gesture. Far above Khaz Algar, on the surface of Azeroth, events were unfolding that would soon involve the hidden continent. The world had endured multiple invasions and catastrophes in recent years. The Burning Legion had been defeated, the Lich King overthrown and replaced. Deathwing the Destroyer had emerged and been vanquished. Azeroth had been stabbed by a Titan sword, leaving a massive wound in Xal'atath that bled the planet's very life force into its world. Heroes from both Alliance and Horde had ventured to Argus, homeworld of the Legion, to end the threat of demons once and for all. Now, in the aftermath of these events, the world seemed to be healing, but appearances deceived. Deep within Azeroth, forces stirred that threatened not merely kingdoms or continents, but the very survival of the planet. The worldsoul, that nascent Titan consciousness at the planet's core, was in danger. Ancient enemies sought to corrupt or destroy it before it could awaken. If they succeeded, Azeroth itself would die, and with it, all life upon its surface. Magni Bronzebeard, former king of Ironforge and now speaker for Azeroth, received visions from the Worldsoul. These visions showed him Khaz Algar, though he did not recognize the location. He saw darkness rising from below, corruption spreading through stone, a threat to the world soul that must be addressed immediately. Magni shared these visions with the leaders of Alliance and Horde, warning them that a new crisis loomed. But the location remained mysterious. No maps showed Khaz Algar, and no living surface dweller claimed knowledge of such a place. The solution came from an unexpected source: Dalaran, the mage city that had been reconstructed after its destruction in the Third War, and again after the Legion's invasion, possessed libraries containing knowledge from the Titans themselves. Khadgar, the archmage who had served as Dalaran's leader through multiple crises, researched the visions Magni described. Deep in the restricted sections of the Violet Citadel, he found references to Sector AR 938, a Titan designation for a region that had been sealed off and hidden from the world. Cross-referencing coordinates and following the trail of obscure footnotes, Khadgar pinpointed the location. Khaz Algar lay northwest of Pandaria, in a region of ocean that had never been thoroughly explored. Dalaran could transport itself, a capability that had proven useful in multiple conflicts. The city's mages, working in concert, could lift the entire island upon which Dalaran sat and move it vast distances. They had done so to travel from the eastern kingdoms to Northrend and later to the Broken Isles. Now they would do so again, relocating Dalaran above Khaz Algar to investigate the threat that Magni's visions had revealed. The teleportation required enormous magical energy and careful coordination, but Dalaran's mages were the finest in the world. They began their preparations. Xal'atath had anticipated this. She had carefully leaked just enough information to ensure that surface dwellers would eventually discover Khaz Algar, but not so much that they would realize the true nature of the threat before arrival. She wanted them to come, wanted their attention focused on this hidden continent, because their arrival would serve her purposes. When Dalaran appeared above Khaz Algar, materializing in the sky above the Isle of Dorn, in a burst of arcane energy, Xal'atath was ready. The Void being had infiltrated Dalaran during the preparation phase, using her ability to phase through shadows to enter the city undetected. She had placed agents throughout Dalaran, mortal servants corrupted by Void Whispers who would act when signaled, and she had brought with her a force of ascended nerubians, hidden in the spaces between dimensions, waiting to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting target. Khadgar stood in the Violet Citadel, coordinating Dalaran's arrival above Khaz Algar and preparing to send scouts to investigate the continent below. He never saw Xal'atath approach. One moment he was alone in his sanctum, and the next she stood before him, the dark heart relic in her hands. This artifact, a thing of crystallized void energy, pulsed with power as Xal'atath channeled her magic through it. The Archmage reacted instantly, raising wards and calling upon his considerable power to defend himself. But Xal'atath had not come to fight Khadgar directly. She needed something from Dalaran, and combat would only waste time. The dark heart flared with dark energy, reaching out to touch not Khadgar but the city itself. Dalaran was a nexus of arcane power, thousands of ley lines converging beneath the city, their energies channeled and shaped by generations of mages. Xal'atath tapped into that power, draining it, pulling it into the dark heart where void magic could corrupt and transform it. Khadgar fought to stop the process, but he was one mage against the combined void-touched power of an old god servant and the corrupted energies of an entire city. The drain continued, the dark heart growing brighter and darker simultaneously as it absorbed Dalaran's arcane reserves. Throughout the city, magical systems failed, protective wards collapsed, the levitation magic that kept Dalaran aloft flickered and died. And then Xal'atath signaled her hidden army. The ascended Nerubians materialized throughout Dalaran, emerging from shadows and void rifts to attack anyone they encountered. Mages who might have defended the city found themselves fighting for their lives against enemies they could barely perceive. The streets of Dalaran erupted into chaos as citizens fled from the attackers, while guards and defenders tried desperately to organize a response. Khadgar made a choice. He could not stop Xal'atath and defend the city and maintain the levitation magic simultaneously. Something had to give. He chose to focus on evacuation, creating portals throughout Dalaran that would allow citizens to escape to other cities across Azeroth. Even as the city fell from the sky, even as the Ascended hunted through its streets, the Archmage worked to save as many lives as possible. Dalaran crashed into the ocean west of Khaz Algar. The impact sent waves radiating outward in all directions, a tsunami that would have devastated coastal regions had the crash site not been so far from any settled lands. The city, which had survived so much, which had been rebuilt after multiple destructions, finally met an end from which there could be no recovery. Dalaran shattered on impact, its towers crumbling, its streets breaking apart, its magical infrastructure suffering catastrophic damage that no amount of repair could fix. Khadgar survived, though barely. He found himself amid the ruins, surrounded by the bodies of those he had failed to save. The Ascended had withdrawn when the city fell, teleporting back to Azj-Kahet to await further orders from their dark mistress. Xal'atath herself had vanished, taking the dark heart with her, now fully charged with the corrupted arcane energy of Dalaran. The Void Being's plan, whatever it might be, had advanced significantly. The destruction of Dalaran sent shockwaves through both Alliance and Horde. The Mage City had been neutral ground, a place of learning and cooperation that transcended faction politics. Its loss represented not just the deaths of thousands of citizens and the destruction of irreplaceable libraries and artifacts, but also the symbolic end of an era. If Dalaran could fall, if Xal'atath could so easily destroy one of the world's greatest strongholds, then nowhere was safe. But the destruction of Dalaran also achieved exactly what Xal'atath had intended. It forced the attention of the surface world onto Khaz Algar. Alliance and Horde leaders could no longer ignore Magni's warnings about threats to the worldsoul. They mobilized their forces, sending expeditions to the hidden continent to investigate, to confront whatever dangers lurked there, and to prevent another catastrophe like Dalaran's fall. Ships departed from Stormwind and Orgrimmar, carrying soldiers and champions ready to face the unknown. They sailed west across the ocean, following the coordinates Khadgar had provided before Dalaran's destruction, and they came at last to the shores of Khaz Algar. The earthen of Dornogal watched the ships arrive with confusion and concern. In all their long isolation, they had never encountered visitors from the surface. They did not understand the politics that divided Alliance and Horde, knew nothing of the wars and conflicts that had shaped surface history. To them, these newcomers were simply strangers arriving without warning or invitation. The Council of Dornogal debated how to respond. Some council members argued for immediate defense, sealing Dornogal and refusing all contact with the surface dwellers. Others suggested a more measured approach, sending representatives to learn why these visitors had come and what they wanted. The debate was settled when Magni Bronzebeard, speaker for Azeroth, arrived with the second wave of Alliance ships. The earthen recognized Magni as one of their kin, transformed by Titan magic into a being of living diamond, but still fundamentally similar to themselves. If one of their own people vouched for these strangers, perhaps they could be trusted. Magni explained the situation to the Council of Dornogal, spoke of the visions he had received from the worldsoul, of the threat emerging from the depths of Khaz Algar, of the destructions of Dalaran, and the need to confront Xal'atath before she could enact whatever dark plan she pursued. The earthen listened with growing alarm. They had known something troubled the lower reaches of their home, had felt the disturbances through the stone, but they had not understood the scope of the threat. If an old god-servant walked the halls of Azj-Kahet, if corruption spread through the Nerubian kingdom, then the Worldcore itself might be at risk. The council agreed to allow the surface dwellers access to Khaz Algar. They would open the sealed passages, provide guides to the deep places, and share their knowledge of the continent's geography. In return, the Alliance and Horde would confront the threat in Azj-Kahet and eliminate the source of corruption before it could spread to the upper reaches. It was a pragmatic alliance, born of mutual necessity rather than trust, but it would serve. The forces from the surface descended into Khaz Algar. They explored the Isle of Dorn, marveling at the earthen city and the Titan architecture that surrounded it. They ventured into the ringing deeps, where machine speakers showed them the ancient installations that maintained planetary stability. They passed through Hallowfall, that vast cavern lit by the Beledar crystal, where they made an unexpected discovery. Hallowfall was not empty. A community of humans lived there, descended from Arathi colonists who had arrived in Khaz Algar generations earlier. These Arathi had sailed west from the eastern kingdoms, seeking new lands to settle, following visions sent by the light. They had discovered the entrance to Khaz Algar and ventured inside, finding Hallowfall and establishing a settlement around the Beledar crystal. Cut off from the surface, they had built their own society, maintaining Arathi traditions while adapting to life in the depths. The Arathi of Hallowfall greeted the newcomers with cautious welcome. They had known nothing of events on the surface, had believed themselves perhaps to be the last humans in existence. To learn that the Alliance endured, that kingdoms still stood and civilization thrived gave them hope. They offered their aid in the fight against Xal'atath, for they too had suffered from nerubian raids launched by Ansurek's forces. The Queen of Azj-Kahet sought to conquer Hallowfall, viewing the Arathi settlement as a threat to her dominion over the depths. With guides from Dornogal and allies from Hallowfall, the champions of the surface world descended to the lowest levels of Khaz Algar. They fought through the outer reaches of Azj-Kahet, battling ascended Nerubians and loyalist forces. The severed threads emerged from hiding to aid them, these Nerubian rebels providing intelligence about Ansurek's defenses and the layout of the City of Threads. Together, this unlikely coalition advanced toward the Nerubian capital. The battles were fierce. The Ascended proved to be formidable opponents, their void-enhanced abilities making them dangerous even to experienced champions. They could phase through attacks, corrupt weapons with a touch, and drain life force from wounded enemies. The passages of Azj-Kahet became charnel houses as the invading force fought its way forward, meter by bloody meter. But they could not be stopped. The champions of Azeroth had faced demons and dragons, had battled the Lich King and defeated Deathwing. Corrupted nerubians, however dangerous, would not turn them back. They reached the City of Threads at last. The massive web city spread before them, a three-dimensional labyrinth of passages and chambers suspended over a seemingly bottomless chasm. At its heart lay Nerub-Ar Palace, where Queen Ansurek held court. The final assault began, champions and rebels fighting side by side through the palace's outer defenses. Ansurek's elite guards fell one by one. The transformed queen's inner circle of ascended nobles proved more challenging, but they too were eventually overcome. And then, in the throne room at the palace's center, the champions faced Ansurek herself. The queen had undergone the most extensive transformation of all her subjects. She bore little resemblance to the nerubian she had once been. Void energies wreathed her enlarged form. Her carapace had turned black as midnight, and her eyes glowed with dark purple light. She was powerful, perhaps more powerful than any individual champion present, but she faced not one or two opponents, but dozens. The finest warriors and mages of Alliance and Horde, supported by severed thread rebels and earthen defenders, all united in singular purpose. The battle against Queen Ansurek tested the champions to their limits. She wielded void magic with devastating effect, opening rifts to pull her enemies into nightmare dimensions where sanity itself became a weapon against them. She summoned ascended reinforcements, waves of transformed nerubians that had to be held back while others focused on the queen. She called upon the Dark Heart's power, channeling the corrupted arcane energy Xal'atath had stolen from Dalaran to fuel her most destructive abilities. But numbers and determination eventually prevailed. One by one, Ansurek's advantages were neutralized. Her reinforcements were cut down. Her void rifts were sealed by mages who had studied such phenomena while battling the Legion. Her connection to the Dark Heart was severed when champions destroyed the focusing crystals she used to channel its power. And when she finally stood alone, wounded and weakened, the champions struck together. Ansurek, Queen of Azj-Kahet, betrayer of her mother and her people, fell. The aftermath of Ansurek's death brought questions rather than answers. Xal'atath herself was nowhere to be found. She had used Ansurek and the Nerubians as tools, distractions to occupy the champions while she pursued some other goal. The Dark Heart, now depleted of the energy it had absorbed from Dalaran, lay inert in the ruins of the throne room. Severed thread leaders secured it, promising to find a way to destroy or neutralize the artifact so it could never again be used for corruption. The champions explored deeper into Nerub-Ar Palace, following passages that led down from the throne room to chambers that even Ansurek's loyalists had avoided. There they found evidence of Xal'atath's true objective. The Void Being had been using Azj-Kahet as a staging ground, a place from which to launch an attack on the Worldcore itself. She had studied the protections the earthen had built, searching for weaknesses, developing strategies to overcome or bypass them. She had mapped the passages that led from Azj-Kahet to the very chamber where the worldsoul's emanations were strongest. But Xal'atath had not yet launched her assault on the Worldcore. Why? The champions found the answer in notes and diagrams left behind in what had apparently been the Void Being's private workspace. She needed more power, more than the Dark Heart could provide even fully charged. She required an additional component, something that could breach the Worldcore's protections and expose the World Soul to corruption. And she believed she knew where to find that component. The Beledar crystal in Hallowfall was not what it appeared to be. The earthen had always assumed it to be a natural formation, some rare crystallization of Titan energies that produced holy light. But Xal'atath's research suggested otherwise. The crystal was artificial, a Titan construct designed to channel and focus the World Soul's energies. More importantly, it could be corrupted, turned from light to void, from protection to weapon. If Xal'atath succeeded in corrupting the Beledar, she could use it to break through the Worldcore's defenses and assault the World Soul directly. The champions raced back to Hallowfall, desperate to reach the Arathi settlement before Xal'atath could enact her plan. But they were too late. By the time they emerged from the passages leading up from Azj-Kahet, Xal'atath had already begun her work. The Void Being stood before the Beledar, hands extended, channeling dark energies into the crystal. The light that had illuminated Hallowfall for generations flickered and dimmed, tinged with purple as void corruption spread through the crystal's structure. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most desperate in Azeroth's history. The champions attacked Xal'atath directly, but she was no corrupted queen relying on borrowed power. She was ancient, crafty, and possessed abilities that mortal minds could barely comprehend. She phased between dimensions, making herself untouchable. She created duplicates, forcing the champions to attack multiple targets simultaneously while uncertain which, if any, were real. She warped reality around herself, turning allies against each other and making wounds appear on bodies that should have been untouched. The Arathi of Hallowfall joined the battle, defending their home and their sacred crystal with religious fervor. They had long venerated the Beledar as a gift from the light, a beacon of hope in the darkness. To see it corrupted was unbearable. Arathi priests called upon the light, channeling holy energy to counter the void corruption spreading through the crystal. They succeeded in slowing the process, but could not stop it entirely. The Beledar's light continued to dim, the purple taint spreading like veins through its crystalline structure. Magni Bronzebeard, speaker for Azeroth, confronted Xal'atath directly. His connection to the World Soul made him uniquely resistant to her void manipulation, his diamond form proof against many of her attacks. He demanded to know her purpose, why she sought to corrupt the Beledar and assault the World Soul. Xal'atath's response was chilling in its simplicity. She sought to give birth to a dark titan, a being of void rather than order. If the World Soul could be corrupted before its awakening, it would become something new, something that would serve the Void's purposes rather than oppose them. The speaker would not allow this. He called upon his connection to Azeroth, channeling the World Soul's own power. The ground shook. The Beledar responded, its light flaring bright enough to burn. Xal'atath screamed in frustration as her carefully laid corruption was seared away, purged by the World Soul's rejection. The void being realized she had lost. She could not overcome the World Soul's will when that will acted directly against her. But Xal'atath was nothing if not adaptable. If she could not achieve victory here and now, she would retreat, regroup, and try again. She opened a void rift, preparing to escape through it to some distant location where she could hide and plan anew. The champions rushed forward, attempting to stop her before she could flee. But Xal'atath was already stepping through the rift, her form fading into the darkness beyond. In the moment before she vanished completely, Xal'atath looked back at the assembled champions. She smiled, an expression that held no warmth, only cold amusement. She spoke words that would haunt those who heard them. This changes nothing. The world soul will fall, if not today, then tomorrow. If not by my hand, then by another's. The void is patient. We have all the time in the world. Then she was gone, the rift closing behind her, leaving only the echoes of her voice in the vast cavern of Hallowfall. The champions had won, but it felt like defeat. Xal'atath had escaped. Ansurek was dead, but the nerubians of Azj-Kahet were left leaderless and divided. Dalaran was destroyed beyond recovery, and the Void Being's final words suggested that the threat to the world soul had not ended but merely been postponed. The champions had bought time, nothing more, yet time was precious. In the weeks and months following the Battle of Hallowfall, much changed in Khaz Algar. The severed threads assumed leadership of Azj-Kahet, working to heal the divisions Ansurek's reign had created. They rejected the use of black blood, helping those nerubians who had undergone partial transformation to reverse the process or at least halt its progression. They reached out to the earthen of Dornogal, establishing formal diplomatic relations between the two peoples who had coexisted in isolation for so long. The Arathi of Hallowfall were reunited with their cousins on the surface. Ships arrived carrying emissaries from the Arathi kingdoms of the eastern kingdoms, overjoyed to discover that their long-lost colonists not only survived but thrived. The Hallowfall community debated whether to return to the surface or remain in the depths that had become their home. In the end, most chose to stay. Hallowfall was their home, the place where they had built lives and raised families. But they would no longer be cut off, maintaining contact with the surface and trading goods and knowledge between the two realms. The Council of Dornogal faced difficult choices about their future. For millennia, the earthen of Khaz Algar had lived in isolation, maintaining their traditions and protecting their secrets. Now the surface world knew of their existence. Ships arrived regularly, bringing traders and diplomats and curious explorers. The earthen could choose to embrace this new era of contact or retreat back into isolation. The council debated extensively before reaching a decision. Khaz Algar would remain open to the surface, but carefully, with strict controls on who could enter and what areas they could access. The Worldcore and its surrounding chambers would remain strictly off-limits to outsiders. The archive, with its stores of earthen memories, would be protected and kept secret. But the upper reaches of Dornogal, the trading halls and public spaces, would welcome visitors. The earthen would engage with the wider world while protecting the most precious and vulnerable aspects of their society. The machine speakers continued their work in the ringing deeps, largely unbothered by the changes occurring above and below them. They cared little for politics or diplomacy, focusing instead on the ancient machinery that was their charge. If anything, they appreciated the increased resources now available to them, as surface engineers and tinkers visited the ringing deeps and shared knowledge about mechanical systems. The exchange proved beneficial to both sides, Titan technology blending with surface innovation to create new solutions to old problems. Magni Bronzebeard remained in Khaz Algar, standing watch over the world soul. His connection to Azeroth had grown stronger during the confrontation with Xal'atath, and he could now perceive subtle changes in the world soul's state. It was still in danger, still vulnerable to corruption, but it was also becoming more aware, more able to defend itself. The world soul was slowly awakening, and when it finally emerged, it would be something unprecedented in the cosmos, a titan born from a world that had survived countless threats and grown stronger through adversity. The champions who had fought through Azj-Kahet and stopped Xal'atath were hailed as heroes upon their return to the surface, but they knew the truth. They had won a battle, but not the war. Xal'atath remained free, plotting and scheming in whatever dark corner she had fled to. The Void's threat to Azeroth had not ended. If anything, it had merely been revealed in its full scope and danger. Khadgar, working from a temporary sanctum established in Stormwind, researched everything known about Xal'atath. He compiled reports from those who had wielded her blade form, interviewed champions who had faced her directly, and consulted ancient texts about the old gods and their servants. He built a profile of the Void being, trying to understand her motivations and predict her next move. But Xal'atath remained an enigma, a creature whose thoughts and goals existed outside the normal frameworks that mortals use to understand behavior and motivation. The Archmage did determine one crucial fact. Xal'atath, for all her power and ancient knowledge, could not act alone. She required tools, servants, individuals, or groups she could manipulate to serve her purposes. In the past, she had used mortal wielders of her blade form. In recent events, she had corrupted the Nerubians. Her next scheme would likely follow the same pattern. She would find someone or something vulnerable to corruption, someone with access to power or resources that could be turned toward her goal of corrupting the world soul. Khadgar shared his findings with the leaders of Alliance and Horde, warning them to remain vigilant. Xal'atath would return, and when she did, she would come with new allies and new strategies. The surface world needed to be ready, needed to maintain its connection to Khaz Algar and the earthen who guarded the Worldcore. Protecting the world soul had become not just a Titan responsibility, but a duty shared by all of Azeroth's peoples. In Azj-Kahet, the Nerubians worked to rebuild their society. The civil war between Ansurek's loyalists and the severed threads had inflicted deep wounds on their people. Trust had been broken, families divided, traditions abandoned in the rush to embrace power. Healing would take time, perhaps generations. But the Nerubians were patient. They had survived the fall of Azjol-Nerub, had maintained their culture and identity through long exile. They would survive this crisis as well. The new leadership of Azj-Kahet established a council system similar to the Earthen Council of Dornogal. Representatives from different castes and regions would share power, making decisions through consensus rather than submitting to the authority of a single monarch. It was a radical departure from Nerubian tradition, which had always favored strong central leadership. But the disaster of Ansurek's reign had taught them the dangers of concentrating too much power in one individual. The new system would have flaws, would create delays and inefficiencies, but it would also prevent any single leader from leading the Nerubians to ruin. Some ascended Nerubians chose to remain transformed despite the dangers and the taint associated with the black blood. They argued that the power they had gained could be used for good purposes, that corruption was a matter of choice rather than inevitability. The council debated extensively before reaching a compromise. The ascended who wished to retain their transformation could do so, but they would be monitored closely. They would swear binding oaths to serve the interests of all Nerubians, not merely their own desires for power, and they would submit to regular examinations by Nerubians trained to detect void corruption, accepting immediate purging if any taint was discovered. The Beledar crystal in Hallowfall returned to its normal state, the void corruption purged by the world soul's direct intervention. But the crystal had been changed by its ordeal. It pulsed differently now, its light occasionally flickering with patterns that seemed almost like communication. The Arathi priests who studied it reported hearing whispers when they meditated in its presence, not the corrupting whispers of the void, but something gentler, more hopeful. Some believed the world soul itself was reaching out through the crystal, trying to communicate with those who protected it. The Worldcore remained secure, its protections intact. The earthen maintained their vigil, checking and rechecking every component of the barrier that shielded the world soul from corruption. They increased patrols in the deep passages, ensuring that no agent of the void could approach the Worldcore undetected. And they worked with Magni Bronzebeard, learning from his connection to the world soul, developing new methods to detect and counter void influence. The Titan Watchers, who had been deactivated millennia earlier, Dornic and Galen, remained in their state of dormancy. Some earthen argued for reactivating them, suggesting that the Watchers' knowledge and power could prove valuable in defending against future threats. Others countered that the Watchers had proven themselves fallible, that Dornic's tyranny and Galan's rebellion demonstrated the dangers of relying on such powerful individuals. The debate continued without resolution, the deactivated Watchers standing as silent monuments to a different era. Archaetus, keeper of the earth, had not returned to Khaz Algar since his confrontation with Galan thousands of years earlier. The earthen did not know whether he even remained aware of their existence. The Titan Keepers had their own concerns, their own responsibilities in the cosmic order. Perhaps Khaz Algar was simply too small a matter to warrant their attention. Or perhaps Archaetus watched from afar, monitoring his creations, but choosing not to interfere, allowing them to grow and develop according to their own path. The question of the Thrager remained unresolved. The crystallized earthen, transformed by their exposure to the world soul, still lived in the deepest chambers of Khaz Algar. They maintained their own society, separate from the earthen above. They remained convinced that the world soul should be free, that the Worldcore represented a prison rather than protection. But they had not attacked the Worldcore since their initial rebellion. Perhaps they had recognized the futility of such assault, or perhaps they simply waited for a better opportunity. Some earthen advocated for attempting communication with the Thrager, trying to find common ground, or at least understanding between the two groups. Others argued that the Thrager were too far gone, too corrupted by the world soul's influence, to be reasoned with. The council authorized a small diplomatic mission, sending envoys into the deep chambers to attempt contact. The mission never returned. What happened to them remained unknown, but the council decided against sending additional expeditions. The Thragar would be left alone as long as they did not threaten the Worldcore. Life in Khaz Algar settled into a new normal. The earthen adapted to their role as hosts to surface visitors, learning the politics and customs of people they had never encountered before. They traded their crafts, sharing Titan technology carefully, selectively, keeping their deepest secrets while offering enough to maintain good relations. They trained with surface warriors, learning combat techniques that went beyond their basic defensive capabilities. They studied surface magic, comparing arcane and divine traditions to their own earth-centered understanding of power. The Nerubians of Azj-Kahet maintained cautious relations with the surface, allowing trade but limiting contact. Too many memories remained of the Scourge, of what had happened when outsiders came to Nerubian lands. They would not make themselves vulnerable again, but they would not isolate themselves either. They had learned that lesson from Ansurek's reign. Balance was required, the middle path between paranoid isolation and naive openness. The Arathi of Hallowfall thrived. The renewed contact with their surface cousins brought resources and knowledge that enriched their community. They expanded their settlement, building new structures around the Beledar. They established farms in the upper regions of Hallowfall, where mushrooms and other cave-dwelling plants could be cultivated. They maintained their military readiness, for Hallowfall stood as the first line of defense between Azj-Kahet and the upper reaches of Khaz Algar. If another threat emerged from the depths, the Arathi would face it. The champions who had fought in Khaz Algar returned to their homes, but they did not forget. They shared stories of what they had seen of the earthen cities and the Nerubian kingdom and the vast caverns that existed beneath Azeroth's surface. They warned of Xal'atath and the Void's continued threat. They advocated for maintaining strong connections with Khaz Algar, ensuring that if crisis came again, the surface world could respond quickly and effectively, and crisis would come. That much was certain. Xal'atath's final words had made it clear that the Void's interest in the worldsoul had not waned. The ancient enemies of the Titans would continue their efforts to corrupt or destroy Azeroth's nascent Titan consciousness. They might come with armies or with subtle corruption. They might work through mortal agents or assault directly, but they would come. Khaz Algar stood ready. The earthen, the Nerubians, the Arathi, all had learned through bitter experience the cost of unpreparedness. They maintained their vigilance, trained their warriors, strengthened their defenses. The Worldcore represented their most precious charge, the sleeping Titan consciousness that would one day emerge as something unprecedented in the cosmos. They would protect it with their lives, would stand against any threat, would ensure that when the world soul finally awakened, it did so free from corruption and ready to take its place among the Titans. The story of Khaz Algar was not finished. It was merely beginning. For thousands of years, this hidden continent had existed in isolation, its peoples pursuing their own paths far from the surface world's conflicts and concerns. But isolation had ended. Khaz Algar was now part of Azeroth's larger story, connected to the fate of the world and all its peoples. What role the earthen and Nerubians would play in that larger story remained to be seen. But they would face the future not as isolated, forgotten groups, but as full participants in the great drama of Azeroth's survival. The integration of Khaz Algar into the wider world brought challenges that the Earthen had never anticipated. Diplomacy with the Alliance and Horde required skills that stone beings of order had little experience with. The political maneuvering, the subtle negotiations, the need to balance competing interests while protecting their own people's welfare, all of it felt alien to Earthen, who preferred direct communication and clear hierarchies of authority. Yet they adapted, as they had adapted to so many changes over the millennia. They appointed ambassadors to serve in Stormwind and Orgrimmar, Earthen who learned to navigate the complexities of servant politics with patience and determination. Trade agreements followed diplomatic recognition. Khaz Algar possessed resources that the surface world valued highly. Rare minerals, extracted from the deepest mines, metals processed using Titan technology, crystalline matrices that could store magical energy more efficiently than any surface artificer could create. In exchange, the Earthen received goods they could not produce themselves, food for the Arathi and other organic inhabitants of Khaz Algar, textiles and materials too delicate for stone hands to craft, knowledge and books and cultural artifacts that enriched Earthen understanding of the wider world. The influx of surface goods and ideas changed Khaz Algar in subtle but significant ways. Young Earthen, those created in the years since contact with the surface began, grew up knowing that their home was part of a larger world. They learned languages beyond Earthen dialects, studied histories that included events their ancestors had never witnessed, and dreamed of possibilities that previous generations had never imagined. Some expressed desire to travel to the surface, to see the sun and stars that they had only heard about in stories. The Council of Dornogal debated whether to allow such travel, weighing the benefits of broader experience against the risks of exposing Earthen to surface corruption and influences. The Arathi of Hallowfall faced their own challenges with the renewed surface contact. For generations, they had been isolated, developing their own unique culture that blended traditional Arathi values with adaptations to subterranean life. Now they discovered that their surface cousins had changed as well, had experienced wars and upheavals that the Hallowfall Arathi knew nothing about. The two groups were still related, still shared common heritage, but they were no longer quite the same people. Some Hallowfall Arathi chose to return to the surface, seeking to reconnect with their roots. Others remained in the depths, preferring the life they knew to the uncertain world above. The Nerubians of Azj-Kahet maintained their cautious distance even after the defeat of Ansurek and the end of Xal'atath's immediate threat. They had agreed to join the Council of Khaz Algar, a new governing body that included representatives from all the continent's major populations, but their participation remained limited. They sent observers rather than full delegates, shared information sparingly, and made clear that while they would cooperate with their neighbors, they would not submit to outside authority. The other members of the council accepted these terms, understanding that the Nerubians' history of betrayal and conquest made trust difficult. The severed threads, those Nerubians who had opposed Ansurek and helped defeat her, worked to rebuild Nerubian society on foundations less prone to corruption. They established schools, where young Nerubians learned not just the traditional skills of war and magic, but also philosophy and ethics. They opened their archives, sharing historical records that documented the rise and fall of Azj-Nerub and the mistakes that had led to that catastrophe. They invited scholars from Dornogal to study Nerubian culture, hoping that cross-cultural understanding might prevent future conflicts. Yet not all Nerubians accepted the new direction. Loyalist factions, those who had supported Ansurek or who simply preferred the old ways of Nerubian supremacy, remained active in the shadows of Azj-Kahet. They conducted raids against the severed threads, assassinated reformist leaders, and spread propaganda claiming that cooperation with other races weakened the Nerubians and dishonored the memory of Azj-Nerub. The severed threads fought back, but the internal conflict drained resources and energy that could have been directed toward rebuilding. The machine speakers faced perhaps the greatest challenge of all. With the ringing deeps, now known to the surface world, various factions sought access to the ancient Titan machinery. Engineers from Ironforge wanted to study the systems, hoping to learn principles they could apply to their own mechanical creations. Mages from the reformed Kirin Tor sought to understand the arcane conduits and their methods of channeling energy across continental distances. Even the goblins expressed interest, though their focus on profit made the machine speakers deeply reluctant to grant them any access whatsoever. The machine speakers developed strict protocols for surface visitors to the ringing deeps. Only a limited number could enter at any time, and always under close supervision. They could observe, but not touch, document, but not experiment, learn, but not interfere. These restrictions frustrated many surface scholars who felt that the earthen were being unnecessarily protective. But the machine speakers would not compromise. The machinery they tended was too important, too vital to planetary stability, to risk damage through careless or uninformed meddling. Some surface races proved more understanding than others. The Dwarves of Ironforge, themselves descended from earthen transformed by the curse of flesh, developed a special relationship with their stone cousins. They respected the machine speaker's knowledge and authority, approached the machinery with appropriate reverence, and shared insights from their own engineering traditions that occasionally proved useful. An exchange program developed, with earthen traveling to Ironforge to study dwarf engineering, while dwarves visited the ringing deeps to learn from the machine speakers. The gnomes of Gnomerigan also established positive relations with the earthen, though their relationship was more academic than the dwarven one. Gnome tinkers marveled at the scale and complexity of Titan machinery, filling notebooks with observations and calculations. They asked endless questions, some insightful and others that revealed fundamental misunderstandings of Titan principles. The machine speakers learned to be patient with gnome curiosity, recognizing it as genuine thirst for knowledge rather than disrespect for established procedures. The status of the Worldcore remained a carefully guarded secret. While the surface world knew that Khaz Algar protected something important, the exact nature of that something and its location deep below Dornogal were never revealed. The Council of Khaz Algar unanimously agree that the Worldcore's existence and purpose must remain hidden. Too many forces sought to corrupt or control the world soul. If they knew exactly where it could be accessed, If they understood that the Worldcore both protected and marked its location, they might mount attacks that even the combined forces of Khaz Algar and the surface world could not repel. Magni Bronzebeard, as speaker for Azeroth, understood this necessity absolutely. He worked with the Council of Dornogal to establish additional defenses, wards, and barriers that would alert defenders if anyone approached the Worldcore with hostile intent. He also trained select earthen in techniques for communicating with the world soul, passing on the knowledge he had gained through his own transformation and connection. These earthen speakers, distinct from the machine speakers, served as intermediaries between their people and the nascent Titan consciousness beneath their feet. The world soul itself grew more active as time passed. The earthen speakers reported increasingly frequent communications, impressions, and emotions that the world soul projected to those who listened. The world soul expressed gratitude for the protection it had received over the millennia, appreciation for the sacrifices the earthen had made in its service. It also expressed growing awareness of the threats that surrounded it, concern about the void's continued schemes, and the various other forces that sought to corrupt or control it before its awakening. Most intriguingly, the world soul began to offer guidance. When the earthen faced difficult decisions, the speakers would sometimes receive impressions that suggested courses of action. These suggestions were never commands, never demands, but rather gentle nudges toward paths that would serve the world soul's interests while respecting earthen autonomy. The Council of Dornogal learned to consult with the speakers before making major decisions, valuing the world soul's perspective, even as they retained final authority over their own governance. The relationship between Khaz Algar and the surface world settled into an equilibrium that served both parties reasonably well. The hidden continent provided resources, knowledge, and strategic depth for defending against void threats. The surface world offered trade goods, military support, and connections to a wider civilization that enriched Khaz Algar's isolated peoples. Neither side fully trusted the other, but trust was not required. Shared interests and mutual benefit provided sufficient foundation for cooperation. Yet everyone understood that this equilibrium remained fragile. Xal'atath still lived, still schemed, still pursued her goal of corrupting the world soul. Other void servants undoubtedly shared that goal, coordinating their efforts in ways the defenders could barely imagine. The old gods, imprisoned though they were, continued to exert influence through their agents and servants. And beyond the void, other cosmic forces viewed Azeroth with interest that might prove benign or hostile, depending on circumstances not yet clear. The earthen prepared for these threats as best they could. They upgraded the Worldcore's defenses, implementing improvements suggested by the collaborative work with the Haranir and Nifin. They expanded their military capabilities, training warriors and establishing armories stocked with weapons forged from the finest materials Khaz Algar could provide. They conducted drills, practicing responses to various attack scenarios, ensuring that when crisis came, they would be ready. The Arathi similarly prepared, their faith in the light strengthened by the trials they had endured. They built additional fortifications around their settlement, established watchtowers along the passages to Azj-Kahet, and trained every able-bodied adult in the arts of war. Their priests worked to strengthen the Beladar's connection to the light, conducting rituals that they believed would make the crystal more resistant to void corruption. Whether these rituals actually achieved anything concrete remained uncertain, but they provided comfort and purpose to a people who knew they stood on the front lines of a cosmic war. The Nerubians of Azj-Kahet faced perhaps the most difficult preparation. They needed to rebuild their military strength after the Civil War, but they had to do so without relying on the Black Blood or other corrupting influences. They needed to learn to trust their neighbors in Khaz Algar while remaining vigilant against betrayal, and they needed to overcome centuries of isolation and supremacist thinking to accept that they were part of something larger than their own race. These challenges would take generations to fully address, but the Severed Threads leadership was committed to the long, difficult work of transformation. Through all these preparations and changes, life in Khaz Algar continued. Earthen carved new halls and forged new tools, maintaining their ancient traditions even as they adapted to new realities. Machine speakers tended their installations, ensuring planetary stability, even as the world above grew ever more chaotic. The Arathi farmed and prayed, raised families, and trained warriors, living their lives in the comfortable glow of the Beladar. And the Nerubians wove their webs and pursued their studies, slowly healing the wounds of civil war and corruption. Visitors from the surface who spent time in Khaz Algar often commented on the strange timelessness of the place. Days and nights meant nothing in the eternal darkness of the deep caverns. The rhythms of life followed different patterns here, measured by the slow patience of stone rather than the fleeting urgency of flesh. To spend time in Khaz Algar was to experience a different relationship with time itself, to understand that some things could not be rushed, that some purposes required dedication, measured in centuries or millennia rather than years or decades. This perspective proved valuable as Azeroth faced threats that seemed to multiply with each passing year. Surface dwellers, with their short lifespans and urgent drives, sometimes lost sight of longer-term considerations in their rush to address immediate crises. The earthen provided counterbalance to that tendency, reminding their allies that some problems required patient, methodical approaches rather than dramatic, immediate action. Sometimes, the best response to a threat was simply to endure, to maintain defenses, and wait for the enemy to exhaust themselves against unmovable stone. Yet the earthen also learned from the surface races that patience alone was insufficient. Sometimes action was required, swift and decisive, before enemies could complete their preparations or before circumstances shifted beyond recovery. The balance between patience and action, between stone's endurance and flesh's urgency, became a central theme in Khaz Algar's integration with the wider world. Neither approach was superior in all circumstances. Wisdom lay in knowing when each was appropriate. As years passed since Dalaran's fall and the battle in Hallowfall, Khaz Algar changed in ways both visible and subtle. The city of Dornogal expanded, new quarters constructed to house the growing population and provide facilities for interaction with surface visitors. The Ringing Deeps saw new installations, smaller-scale implementations of Titan principles designed by machine speakers, working in collaboration with surface engineers. Hallowfall's Arathi settlement grew more diverse as some surface Arathi chose to relocate there, bringing with them new perspectives and traditions that enriched the underground community. and in Azj-Kahet, the slow work of reconstruction and reform continued, each small step forward representing hard-won progress against centuries of ingrained tradition. Through all these changes, the Worldcore continued its eternal vigil. The barrier held strong, keeping the world soul protected from corruption and harm. The earthen maintained their watch, checking and rechecking every component, ready to respond to any failure or weakness. And deep below the world core, the world soul grew ever closer to awakening. That moment when it would finally emerge and take its place among the titans of the cosmos. What would happen at that awakening, none could say with certainty. The speakers reported that the world soul itself did not fully know what form it would take or what powers it would possess. It was something unprecedented, a titan born from a world that had endured corruption and assault, that had been nurtured and protected by the very mortal races it would eventually transcend. Perhaps it would be different from other titans, shaped by its unique experiences and the diversity of life that flourished upon its surface and within its depths. The earthen allowed themselves to hope that when the world soul awakened, it would remember what they had done, that it would honor their long vigil and grant them purpose in whatever new age would dawn. They were creatures of function, given meaning by the duties they performed. If those duties were fulfilled, if the world soul no longer needed protection, what would become of the earthen? Would they simply cease, their purpose completed, or would they find new purposes, new ways to serve in a transformed world? These questions had no answers yet, but the earthen faced them without fear. They had been created to serve, had grown beyond that simple origin to become people with wills and dreams of their own, and they would continue to adapt and grow whatever the future might bring. Khaz Algar had endured through ages of isolation. It would endure through whatever came next. The stone was patient, the stone was eternal, and the stone would remain as standing watch over the world soul long after the last echoes of current crises had faded into history. Deep below Dornogal, in the chamber where the Worldcore maintained its eternal watch over the world soul, something stirred. The world soul, that vast consciousness at the planet's core, grew more aware with each passing day. It had been threatened, assaulted by void corruption, but it had survived, and in surviving, it had learned. It was no longer merely a passive thing to be protected. It was becoming active, aware, capable of defending itself. When it finally awakened, when the long gestation period ended and the new titan emerged, Azeroth would witness the birth of something unique in all the cosmos. A titan born not in isolation, but surrounded by mortal races who had fought and bled to protect it. A titan that owed its existence not just to the cosmic ordering of its creators, but to the courage and sacrifice of those who called Azeroth home. That day lay in the future, perhaps distant, perhaps near. But in Khaz Algar, the watch continued. The earthen maintained the world core, the nerubians guarded the depths, the Arathi stood ready in Hallowfall, and far above, on the surface of Azeroth, the champions who had saved Khaz Algar remained vigilant, knowing that their greatest battle might yet lie ahead. The world soul would be protected, the void would be opposed, and Khaz Algar, once hidden and forgotten, would stand as a bulwark against the darkness. The complete story of Khaz Algar was a tale of isolation ending, of hidden peoples emerging into the light, of ancient duties undertaken in solitude, now shared among allies. It was a story of corruptions faced and overcome, of tyranny overthrown and democracy embraced, of individuals choosing their own paths rather than submitting to the dictates of distant masters. It was a story of hope in darkness, of light enduring in the depths, of the certainty that no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against them, mortal courage and determination would prevail. And so, the earthen of Dornogal returned to their work, carving new halls and forging new tools, maintaining their traditions while embracing change. The machine speakers tended their ancient installations, ensuring the continued stability of the world above. The Nerubians rebuilt their society, learning from past mistakes and forging a new future. The Arathi watched over Hallowfall, their faith in the light unshaken despite the trials they had endured. And deep below them all, the world soul continued its slow awakening, protected and nurtured, growing toward the day when it would finally emerge and take its place among the stars. Khaz Algar endured. It had endured through ages of isolation, through civil war and corruption, through assault and betrayal. And it would endure through whatever challenges the future might bring. For the peoples of Khaz Algar had learned the most important lesson of all. They were not alone. They had allies, friends, those who would stand with them against any threat. Together, they were stronger than any enemy. Together, they would ensure that the world soul reached its destiny. Together, they would write the next chapter in the story of Azeroth, a story that continued even now, in the hidden depths and soaring heights of this world they called home. If you enjoyed this journey into the depths of Khaz Algar, please like this video and subscribe to World of Sleepcraft for more tales from the World of Warcraft universe. Let these stories carry you into peaceful sleep, where dreams of ancient titans and hidden kingdoms await. Rest well, and may your adventures in Azeroth continue, whether waking or sleeping.